So we're going to dig right in to digging in with our first segment.
Hang on, roller coaster. So we got some big boys here.
So if it doesn't have a tag, what does that mean?
Just from a different area. So we have 2 areas came to the ranch not tagged. Purple tags are from Theodore Roosevelt out of North Dakota, and these yellow tags are from the Badlands National Parks here in South Dakota. So we try to really break it up to, all right, the last one I shot was from the Badlands National Parks. This time I'm taking something different. I'm just gonna shut it off and sit here for a second and kind of see who we got here.
There's a good bull in here that'll give you a chance.
Yeah, I was just looking at that. I'm gonna see if I can get a tag number. Yeah, that lead bull I think is our boy. I think he's a no tag. He'd be good to go, green light. We'll move up on him here. This might happen pretty quick now just because he's kind of on the move. 10-4, I'm gonna shut it off and kind of get set, see if he'll stay back behind these families. Yes, but go ahead and you can get out on this right side. And if he turns and gives me a shot, it's gonna happen quick. Try to take him. Brayla, you sit still, okay? So the shot I'm working for is through the ear. And this is where being patient has that big role, because if you rush this, it won't go right. But as soon as the shot goes off, I need you guys to be inside so I can get to him right away, just in case. Brayla, be ready. It's a tight window with that one behind him, but trajectory is all right for now. There you go, bud. So right now you always keep an eye on the legs, because the legs can still move and react. And you touch their eye, you don't see any whites of the eye or it's not blinking, that animal is now dead. I'm gonna find that artery and get him bled. So then with this now is I just give tobacco offering for this animal for giving that sacrifice. And the proper prayers are said before and after.
I'm a long way from home, but my guide TJ isn't. And neither is this herd of bison. Here on the lands of the Sicangu Lakota people, TJ and his ancestors have lived with and from bison for countless generations. A relationship so intertwined that he refers to them as relatives. So far, we've looked at land access, and we can see how it's directly tied to consolidation and concentration. But behind and beyond both of those looms a larger threat: a changing climate. We went out this morning with TJ. He described this process, the harvest, as bringing back a relative. The time that TJ took to actually kind of form a different relationship with the animal was something that I've never felt before. Tasted part of the heart. This is my first time tasting any sort of heart. So it was very tender. It had a little bit of grit, but it was great.
what I think of when I see the buffalo come back. That's the first thing that comes to my mind is being made whole again by having my relatives come home. Buffalo have always been quite central to the ecosystem here on the plains, not just from an ecological standpoint, but from a cultural standpoint. Ecologically, bison are one of the engineers that craft the very landscape that you see here.
The buzzword nowadays is regenerative agriculture, especially, and that's just something indigenous people have been doing for time immemorial.
And now to you, Kelly.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm here in unceded territory of the Awas-was speaking Uypi-tribe, which is currently stewarded by the Amamutsan tribal band. It's currently called Santa Cruz. I wanted to mention, as we saw in this really deeply profound scene in the film, buffalo are not only integral to the community health of the Tsechangu Lakota people, but the entire ecosystem. The film mentions how buffalo are incredible ecological engineers. We know that when there were 30 million buffalo freely roaming the grasslands of North America, it was this prairie ecosystem that contained some of the most carbon-rich earth in the world. In that ecosystem, carbon could be stabilized underground for hundreds or thousands of years. The presence of buffalo, next slide please, results in exponentially more biodiversity. As buffalo move around, eat grasses to different levels, and fertilize the soil, this results in more insects, more birds, and more biodiverse plant communities. And when these plant communities are healthier, they take carbon out of the atmosphere and put it back into the soil, resulting in a more diverse and healthy community of soil microbes underground as well. We know that when these prairies were plowed by European settlers after the homesteading that occurred after the Dawes Act, they released up to half of their soil carbon into the atmosphere. Next slide, please. Within the grassland ecosystem, buffalo make profound sense as a critical species to be in relationship with the land and the people. Buffalo are more resilient in hot and dry conditions and also cold conditions than cows. Their meat is also healthier for humans. It's much more rich in omega-3s, which fight inflammation, compared to the much higher levels of omega-6s in beef. In this ecosystem, we can see clearly how climate change is the direct result of the genocide of indigenous peoples and the ecosystems they steward. I want to speak to another very important part of the food system. The same devastating forces of colonization and globalization that have wreaked havoc on indigenous people and food systems are doing the same to our seed systems. Seeds have also become a site of profit for corporations. Just like we see corporate consolidation in the meat industry, the same thing is happening in the seed industry. Next slide. The ability for communities to save seeds around the world is under major threat. The primary threat is corporate takeover of land and lack of land access and land loss for communities of color. With this commodification of seed, consolidation, and loss of seed varieties, we see more hunger, loss of community sovereignty and health, and a dramatic drop in regionally climate-adapted seeds that are available. Industrial agriculture, mining, and forced migration continue to destroy the social fabric of communities and their ways of life. We see the extraction of seed genetics being separate from their ways of life. This consolidation and corporate takeover of our seeds leaves our food system in an incredibly vulnerable place. Currently, California is at the nexus of the compounding climate crisis. In just the past few years, my peers and I have farmed through drought, dangerous wildfires, smoke, and devastating floods. Next slide, please. Each of these crises are compounded by the historical legacies of discrimination that farmers of color are already facing. In 2023, due to environmental racism, the levee of the Pajaro Valley River was breached during heavy rains, leading to the immediate and devastating flooding of farms, houses, and the businesses of the families of young people that I work with. Many of the fields in Pajaro were contaminated by floodwaters, leaving crops unharvestable and workers out of work for months. Next slide, please. Seeds, however, are one of the most powerful tools we have in building healthy community food systems that are adapted to climate change. These are just some of the seeds that I've been stewarding through climate chaos. On the left, the shark fin melon had to be dry farmed due to a major drought that year. This Korean popcorn in the middle adapted to late planting and early rains. And this catnip, or Korean perilla, on the right side, went through its flowering period during 4 weeks of thick smoke and ash raining from the air during the 2020 wildfires in Santa Cruz. Our seed keeping is a tool for imagining the future, thinking about our future ancestors, and how our acts of remembering can be a service to our youth. Next slide, please. Over the past 5 years, I've been working with a national collective of Asian American farmers through second-generation seeds to create a decentralized seed resource that will keep seed as a living resource that is actively adapting to climate. This looks like a strong network of growers invested in one another and a larger community that has a growing and continuing connection to their seeds and their stories. This looks like the development of regional seed breeding and stewardship hubs that are increasingly adaptable to climate changes. We steward and preserve seeds significant to the Asian diaspora, next slide please, including North Africa and West Asia. Second-generation seeds began as a project of Kristen Leach at Namu Farm and became a collective of Asian American growers in 2019. In 2023, we had our own inaugural seed growing fellowship with farmers across the country who are focused on seed projects with crops important to their communities. Next slide, please. My work has been focused on the community education and organizing aspect of our work. Second Generation has a commercial seed line and catalog, which has become a source for culturally significant seeds grown by and for agroecological farmers. We work to create cultural and technical resources for our community, which includes grower guides and technical resources, cook-alongs, and community gatherings. Next slide. We work to connect farmers to community members and also chefs so that we can expand and build new pathways for ongoing participatory and community-informed breeding efforts. We try to engage and connect communities more closely and in depth along the entire cycle of crop breeding, seed saving and selection, growth and harvesting, and ultimately eating through community events and programs. Next slide, please. We also work to create economic opportunities for farmers marketing Asian seeds and vegetables by building education and relationships, new market opportunities so that we can build power and enact structural and power shifts in the seed industry. Next slide, please. Around the planet, we know that biodiversity is richest on Indigenous managed land. Indigenous communities protect over 80% of global biodiversity. In their seed systems, they are custodians and stewards of natural and agricultural ecosystems, protecting, conserving, and restoring them. We know that biodiversity and cultural diversity are inextricably linked. When you displace culture and community, you endanger ecosystems, and vice versa. We know that when you displace culture, you endanger the communities and the ecosystems that are related to this. Loss of land for community results in loss of foodways, loss of culture, cultural practices, language, and the ability to care and steward for ecosystems. Next slide, please. In a recent community workshop that I held, a comrade from the Purepecha indigenous community recently said something that really stuck with me. He said, their people asked, how can we live again with the cycle of corn? Well, we can plant corn, but that's just the start. We can't just grow corn and preserve corn. We also need the community life, the rituals, practices, memories, eating, and storytelling to sustain the seeds. This kind of being of seeds being embedded and sustained in our communities allows them to keep evolving with place. This kind of seed keeping is very distinct and very different from the storehouses of genetics of seed banks that some governments and organizations are creating that lock seeds up in a static way, unable to adapt to climate or evolve with community. Next slide, please. Seed sovereignty is the right of our communities to have self-determination, access to, and agency over our seeds. Seed sovereignty is the right to have access to culturally appropriate, biodiverse, healthy seeds that are not controlled by corporations. This requires us to have communities that are able to be in relationship with land. And I'll turn it back over to Holly for the next clip.
Hi, good morning. Masika Henson.
Webster Davis.
Nice to meet you, Webster Davis.
Are you this
Hi,
way?
Thomas. Nice to meet you. I'm good. Good.
Yeah.
You can keep talking, ma'am. I can talk and
You can talk. Okay.
I'm not like some people. I can talk and do things at the same time.
Great.
We'll take the swine industry. What happened to the hogs? You know, we used to have a market in Mexico, Missouri, Central Missouri livestock auction. We'd go take our hogs over there. But today you don't have that opportunity. You know, there is no livestock market over there every day. You know, we don't have the buyers there. We don't have the packing houses there. You don't have no competition.
I've been farming for about 65 years. I don't know what's going on, but I can tell you what is happening. I can produce just as much now or more than I did before, but I'm getting a third less for it. And when you go to the store to buy it, my own, I pay almost 40% more for it. Now, I can't tell you what's happening or who's happening, but I can tell you that it's not the small farmers. And what is happening is that small farmers are now, just like I'm getting ready to retire. I got nobody in my family want to follow my footsteps because they can't make no living. But it's somewhere between the producer and the consumer, somebody is making some money. Now, I can't tell you where it is, and like Webster got some statistics and stuff. I don't know that, but I know that one statistic gonna be out me. So I'm gonna be done with it in another year. I'm giving it up.
That really got me. It's very emotional for me. I am almost in tears right now because it's making me think about what comes after them, who comes after them. And it feels like there is no one coming after them.
So the corporate consolidation that these two farmers spoke to that's making it impossible for them to make a living is also making land access extremely difficult for our generation. As we know, many farmers are currently aging out of farming. Unfortunately, there are thousands of acres of land transitioning as we speak. And if there are no pathways to transfer this land, it most commonly gets sold to developers and investment firms, which drive up the costs and often take it out of farming forever. I was shocked to learn that over 70% of current retiring farmers do not have a succession plan for their farms. Making this issue even more concerning, there's a 2015 study from UC Davis that found that 1 acre of developed urban land compared to 1 acre of irrigated cropland generates 70 times the amount of greenhouse gas emissions. Parallel to the story of land accumulation by corporations is also the story of systematic land loss across communities of color, which is very significant when 80% of the wealth in this country is inherited. Since the arrival of Europeans on Western soil, there has been a political and economic project in motion to remove land and keep land from communities of color. From the genocide of Indigenous peoples to Black land loss in the South due to discrimination from the USDA to the incarceration of Japanese farmers. Like countless others, my great-grandparents were part of the prolific Japanese farming community before World War II. My grandfather also had a business at the Los Angeles Produce Mart. They had to abandon everything when Executive Order 9066 was issued, leaving their farm businesses and all their belongings behind. This history requires us to ask, how does land loss impact the ability of a community to retain its identity, preserve its culture, and create and sustain community health? How does land loss impact community sovereignty? In the past decade, I've had the incredible privilege of training and working directly with thousands of passionate, talented, and brilliant young farmers through my work at the UC Santa Cruz Center for Agroecology Farm, and now my work with youth at the FoodWhat farm. While there are more training programs today, as well as resources for young people to learn about farming, and even educational programs specifically for training BIPOC farmers, by far the biggest challenge is lack of access to land. In my recent work with the National Young Farmers Coalition, next slide please, we conducted a national survey to survey thousands of young farmers across the country. And what we found was that finding affordable land to buy is the top challenge for young farmers, and of course is even more challenging for farmers of color. Next slide. What's devastating is that we also found that in 2021, 41% of young farmers stopped farming because of challenges due to access in land, which is devastating. Next slide, please. And it's especially important to note that the young farmers that are leaving farming are also highly likely to be doing work that sustains, feeds, and betters their communities. Excuse me. Next slide, please. In the survey, 86% of the young farmers that were surveyed identified as using regenerative practices, and 97% of the young farmers surveyed identified their farming practices as sustainable. It breaks my heart to see all the incredible, skilled young people who want to farm in ingenious, creative, and caring ways that deeply provide for their land and their community that we are losing from the farming field due to lack of secure land access. Next slide, please. Seed sovereignty is our right to have access to culturally appropriate, biodiverse, healthy seeds that are not controlled by corporations. This requires us to have communities that are in relationship to land. Respecting and protecting the rights of peasant farmers, indigenous peoples, farmers from the global south, and farmers of color is the foundation of food sovereignty and seed sovereignty. If we continue to think about seed sovereignty as a human right, that it is a right for people to be in relationship with and to steward their food and seeds, then we have to ask what needs to happen for all people in our community or region to be able to do this? What needs to change? What does it require to build a community-led seed movement? Next slide, please. What I know is that we must prioritize the resourcing of communities that are most impacted by systems of oppression to support their autonomy, their self-determination, and land access so they can steward their food and seed and lands. This must happen in a secure way because we know secure land tenure is required to build soil and capture carbon. Sustainability relies on long-term and secure land tenure, as well as intergenerational planning and the ability to invest in your land. I'll turn it back over to Holly for the next clip.
And what happens here?
So we are actually at the Keowakpala Garden inside the Geodome. And as you can see, a lot of things are grown here.
So over here we have some salad greens. We got some Swiss chard right here, mustard greens, spinach back there.
The task was really to start building an indigenous food system here that kind of builds power and empowers the community. It was important for us to be able to grow our own food and to know where our food comes from. land in general, I think for Indigenous people, especially for Lakota people, we had, trees in place with the U.S. government. We had land all the way from the Missouri River all the way to, into Montana and to Wyoming. And that slowly started reducing in size.
I think there's a pretty clear connection between land access and food sovereignty. Food sovereignty is full control of the foods that are culturally significant and relevant to you.
For people who were nomadic farming, like that's something that wasn't culturally relevant to us, and then to be forced onto a land and forced into farming, we weren't traditionally farmers. And so being able to be farmers and have that connection to the land and applying that relationship with the land, it's something how we're kind of making it a tradition for ourselves.
Though agriculture has been a site of oppression and exploitation for communities of color throughout history, it can also be the most powerful site of resistance, self-determination, and community liberation. As they shared in the film clip just played, it's that connection between land and ourselves that is where our health comes from. It's through farming and growing food that we can provide nourishment, food, healing, and medicine for our communities. It's the way that we can steward, protect, and be in relationship with land the way we were meant to. It's the way that we can retain our connections to our stories and preserve our culture. Next slide. It is people rooted in place that are able to steward the diversity and resilience of healthy ecosystems and food systems. We can see clearly that land is the foundation of community health, and that healthy and strong communities require people to be connected to land. This kind of future requires us to have access to land, as well as the access to seeds, soils, and space to grow our visions of freedom, resilience, and possibility for a different world. As we have witnessed, climate change is a symptom of a deep lack of harmony in our relationship to land. Climate change will not be fixed by inventing technological ways to sequester carbon, produce green energy, or by switching to more organic farming practices. It is not picking and choosing from a menu of techniques. It means that we have to take monumental, unprecedented steps to course correct from the hundreds of years of land theft and severing of communities from healthy ecosystems. Next slide. Rebuilding soil carbon means that rebuilding our relationships and connections to land is part of our work, and rebuilding a social fabric that tethers us to place. We have to take dramatic action so that farmers and land stewards that already have this ancestral intergenerational knowledge of land stewardship can apply this work of healing land and community at scale, while also building new ways of relating to land. What's at stake is the dignity of those that live on land and the destiny of generations that come after. What's at stake is the health of all of us, our culture, and the literal survival of our communities now and for the future. In the various places that I've worked, I've been working to build programs and community learning spaces to explore this, but this work has never had a secure home. To strengthen and expand the community work that I've been doing, I'm also starting my own farm project as a place to study legacies of community resistance and survival, a place that holds connection to land for people to imagine new worlds and community futures through our relationship building to the land, to seeds, to our ancestors, and to each other. The farm will have 3 branches. The first branch of the farm will be focused on growing climate-adapted, culturally important seeds, and will further the work that I'm doing with second-generation seeds in expanding our community-based seed sovereignty movement while growing the knowledge, skills, and resources for others to be able to do the same. Next slide, please. The second branch of the farm will be focused on ancestral technologies of preservation and medicine and how to adapt these for the world and challenges of our time. Next slide. And the third branch of the farm will be a community freedom school, where we'll explore and study community histories and imagine new futures through a transcultural, transnational lens, knowing that the new future must be collective and will come from working in collaboratives, networks, and collectives as part of ecosystems that connect together, that can draw from deep mycelial networks of generational knowledge and wisdom in service of imagining new futures and communities of care rooted in solidarity. My farm space will explore the strength of our collective memory in allowing us to remember and connect to the deep legacies of pain, but also the brilliant wisdom of our histories, while exploring the infinite possibilities of collective imagination for a different future. And will be a space for us to grow our own visions of freedom, resilience, and possibility for a different world, and a place for us to plant the roots of multiplication of community-based systems of care that we want to see. Next slide, please. Thank you for attending and thank you for listening.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kelly. I will put your contact information back on the slide as soon as we're done, so that folks know how to connect with you. Everyone, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. I'm getting some to me individually, but feel free to put them where everyone can see them. Kelly, the first question for you is, everyone is curious, why did you select those 3 scenes to talk about today, and specifically what resonated in the buffalo harvesting scene, the first one that we showed?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Those 3 scenes to me kind of spoke to the range of all the issues that I've been thinking about and talking about. And specifically the buffalo harvest scene was really profound for me when I saw this scene of the buffalo meat processing and this whole intergenerational community together. Young children running around and laughing and sharing, and also elders in the space. And that to me it's such a contradiction to the food system that many of us know. And yet it's so familiar to so many people. And so that felt really profound and important for people to be able to witness in sort of understanding and being able to imagine the kinds of community-based food systems that can and are possible.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Another question that I received is about seed sovereignty, what you had just touched on. How can funders best support seed sovereignty at a local level, and what would you encourage maybe more at a state level or even national?
Mm-hmm. At a local level, there are all over the country and all over the world, there's incredible community-based seed projects that are happening where people are building their own seed systems, because this work is incredibly regional and site specific. What that looks like is very different in each place. But ultimately, the biggest thing that we need to do this work is to urgently keep land out of corporate control by investing in secure land tenure and ownership for BIPOC farmers that are already doing this work. The amazing thing is that there's so many people that have the skills, passion, and knowledge right now to implement regenerative practices that will transform our planet. But the challenge is that these are the very communities that have been marginalized the most in our food system. So that's where we need to put our efforts.
For those on the line that are not familiar with FoodWhat, would you mind giving us a bit of a deep dive into what you all do with youth and what that organization is working on right now?
Sure. So FoodWhat is a youth empowerment and food justice organization. We work in Santa Cruz County, primarily in South County, with youth based in Watsonville. And what we are, we're essentially a farming program for youth that have really struggled with being in the traditional school system. So we work with youth that have been kicked out of schools, that are currently impacted by the legal system, that are on probation, or youth that are in foster care. A lot of the youth we work with are also part of farm worker families. And so we're creating a space for them to explore and develop their own connection to land in a way that can be on their terms, and that can provide a opportunity for them to experience what it's like to be able to grow their own food and to be able to have self-determination and sovereignty around that, outside of the corporate food system that sort of surrounds the context of their community and literally the land of our space.
Great. We have another question going off of young farmers and this myth of disinterest in farming. I know we talked a lot about that on our planning call for today's session. Do you have a success story that you could share about a young beginning farmer, and particularly the farmer training programs that you mentioned, how they were supported from the beginning to having a successful farm?
Yeah, there are lots of stories of successful farmers. And I want to say also that what's more common is that many of the folks that I've worked with have actually started farms and then actually had to retire from farming early because land access has been so difficult, or they've been farming on sites that have actually run out of water. So while a lot of the young people that I've worked with have started incredible projects, it's been very difficult to maintain in California, particularly in the context of the climate challenges that we've been working with. One example of a farmer that I worked with at UC Santa Cruz. So I'll talk about an amazing young farmer, Scott Fleeman Chang, and Scott started a farm, Shaoshan Farm, which provided Chinese vegetables to the San Francisco Bay Area and beyond. And he began his farm on a beautiful piece of land in the area north of San Francisco, on a place where there had been access to water for generations. But a year and a half into starting the farm, essentially there was very, very little water available, which was a surprise to everyone. And so he had to transition his whole operation to dry farming. And then after that, it became too difficult to sustain both the economics of the farm as well as sort of the technical aspect of trying to produce in the land site that he was in. So that's just one example of a farmer that had incredible talents and an incredible farm, and is currently still trying to figure out how to farm in a way that makes sense. Yeah.
Great. We have one last question for you. SAFSF is a network of funders and investors, and we do have quite a few funders on this call. What is your call to action to them, Kelly? What should they look at investing in? Something that's been really valuable for you and your work that others have funded? Call to action, what they should do.
Yeah, thank you. What we really, really need is more investment in communities that are already doing this work, for folks for which regenerative agriculture is already a way of life. We already have the knowledge, the desire, and clearly the urgent need to make big shifts in our food and agriculture system, and land is the biggest hurdle. It's the reason why people can't stay in farming. It's the reason people can't start farming. And as we saw in the Young Farmer Survey, it's the reason people are leaving farming. So we need to figure out ways to invest in community that allow young farmers stability and the ability to build. And for folks to be able to focus on sustainable long-term solutions instead of day-to-day survival. Ultimately, what we need to be regenerating is not just soil, but the whole complex web of relationships that we have and exist in when we have stable communities in relationship to land. And that whole web needs to be repaired. And so we need to be able to rebuild our communities in relationship to land to be able to do this work. Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelly, so much. Hold on just a second. A tractor is driving past my house. I'm going to put the slide back up with your contact information. For everyone who's on the call, we will be sending out follow-up resources, as well as information of how you can screen digging in for your organization, for your community. You only saw about 8 minutes of the 40-minute film, and the entire film is worth the time to watch it. It's so great. We are using aspects of this Digging Deeper series to develop a multimedia discussion guide to help in having fruitful community conversations around the topics in digging in, as well as to elevate on the ground solutions like second generation seeds and the other work that Kelly is doing. With that, you will also receive information to sign up for our next call later this month. Thank you also so much for joining us today. Thank you, Kelly, for sharing your expertise with us and with our network. And we hope to see you all at the next event.